When you're old and grey and full of sleep, and nodding by the fire, take down this book and slowly read and dream of the soft look your eyes had once and of their shadows deep. How many loved your moments of glad grace and loved your beauty with love, false or true. But one man loved the pilgrim soul in you and loved the sorrows of her changing face. And bending down beside the glowing bars, murmur a little sadly how love bed and paced upon the mountains overhead and hid his face amid a crowd of stars.
Welcome to The Last Quiet Page, a podcast where we explore the lives and works of great writers with insight and nuance. I'm the unstable narrator, joined as always by my co host, the incurable reader. Today, we have a fascinating episode ahead, a deep dive into the world of William Butler Yeats. Yeats was an Irish poet and playwright, one of the foremost figures of 20th century literature. From his early days in Dublin and London through the fervour of the Irish Revival, to his later years as an elder statesman of poetry. Yeats' life is a tapestry of art, politics, and spirituality.
William Butler Yeats was born in Dublin on June 13, 1865. He came from an Anglo-Irish Protestant family, and his father, John Butler Yeats, had been a lawyer before becoming a well-known portrait painter. When Yeats was just 2 years old, his family moved to London, but he spent most of his boyhood summers with his grandparents in Sligo, on Ireland's west coast. The Sligo landscape, with its lakes, hills, and folklore, which would later leave a lasting mark on him. In 1883, he enrolled at the Metropolitan School of Art in Dublin, and by 1885, his poems were already being published in student journals. Yes, despite his Protestant heritage, Yeats identified fully as Irish. He belonged to the Anglo-Irish minority, but as one source notes, he staunchly affirmed his Irish nationality. He immersed himself in Irish myths and traditions, developing a self-image as a distinct Irish artist. Even while part of the London Fin de Siècle literary scene, he remained tied to Ireland's cultural revival. By his early 20s, Yeats was already combining romantic lyricism with the rich legends and folklore of Ireland.
Psychologically, Yeats' earlier life sits at the fault of line of belonging. Growing up Anglo-Irish Protestant, educated partly in England and yet emotionally rooted in Sligo, he occupies what psychology calls a liminal identity, never fully inside one world and never entirely outside another. That tension doesn't dissolve, it becomes productive. Yeats' repeated return to lakes, hills, and rural imagery suggests that Sligo became a mental template, a place he revisits whenever the external world feels fragmented or hostile.
By the late 1880s, Yeats was fully immersed in the literary world. His first volume of verse was published in 1887, but at this point his energy was especially focused on drama. In fact, his early output of plays was larger and, at least initially, more influential than his poetry. Yeats was a driving force in the Irish literary revival, alongside Lady Augusta Gregory and others. He established a native Irish theatre. They founded the Irish Literary Theatre in 1899, and their later success led to the Abbey Theatre opening its doors in 1904. Yeats himself was Abbey's chief playwright in its early years, and the theatre became a platform for his legend-infused dramas. Many of those early plays draw on Irish legend and mysticism. The Countess Kathleen in 1892 tells of a woman who sacrifices herself to save a village from famine, and Kathleen Ni Houlihan 1902 portrays Ireland as an old woman inspiring young men to fight. One biographer notes that Yeats' plays usually treat Irish legends and reflect his fascination with mysticism and spiritualism. These dramas, often starring Maud Gonne as the personification of Ireland, fused national politics with folklore. Meanwhile, Yeats' early poetry in the 1890s was quite lush and symbolic. He co-founded the Rhymers Club in London around 1890, which prized ornate language and musicality. His collections like The Wanderings of Oisin, 1889, and The Wind Among the Reeds, 1899, are full of mythic imagery. But as he moved into the 1900s, Yeats began to pare down his style. By 1903, he was shifting away from the intricate style of The Wind Among the Reeds toward conversational rhythms and simpler diction, marking the start of a new, more direct phase in his verse.
Montcalm's presence in these works complicates things further. She becomes both muse and symbol, what literary theory might call an aestheticized abstraction. Ireland in Yeats' early drama is often feminized, idealized, and distanced, which allows political desire to be expressed through beauty rather than policy. This strategy is powerful, but it also carries limits.
A key thread through Yeats' work is mythology. Irish writers of his day often infused their work with Celtic legends to inspire national pride. Yeats spoke of a hidden island beneath the surface of daily life, a world of pagan gods, heroes, and fairy folk. He envisioned his poetry as a way to access that ancient, mystical island. Indeed, Yeats once noted that he would never go for the scenery of a poem to any country but his own. His early verse is rich with Irish mythic figures. This gave his nationalism a timeless, magical dimension. Yet Yeats' attitude toward Irish politics was complicated. He deeply cared about Ireland's destiny, but he was wary of extremism. He witnessed the 1916 Easter Rising and famously wrote Easter 1916, which begins all changed utterly, a terrible beauty is born. As one biography notes, Yeats was a convinced patriot who nonetheless deplored the hate and the bigotry of the nationalist movement, and his poetry often protests such divisiveness.
His longtime muse, Montcalm, certainly steered him towards militant nationalism in the 1890s. But by the 1920s, Yeats served in the Irish Senate, 1922 to 1928, of the new Free State, focusing on cultural renewal instead of violence. In that role, he witnessed the birth of modern Ireland and tried to uphold its ideals through art and education. Another symbolic motif in Yeats' work is the idea of the mask. He even wrote a short poem called The Mask about how a loved one can be enchanted by the face she presents. Masks represent the personas we adopt. In fact, the Nobel biography lists mask as one of the Yeats' recurrent themes. After 1910, Yeats began writing plays with masks, dance, and stylized gesture, experiments that were inspired by Japanese no masks.
We must also mention Yeats' lifelong fascination with the occult. As a young man, he joined the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in 1890, a London based esoteric society. He spent decades delving into spiritualism, astrology, and alchemy, often alongside Maud Gonne and later with his wife, Georgie Hyde Lees. Heath's private notebooks are filled with visions and symbolic systems. He eventually wrote A Vision, 1925, revised in 1937, a dense prose work outlining his mystical philosophy. A Vision explores the relation between imagination, history, and the occult, and remains key to understanding Yeats' thought. Psychologically, this shows Yeats' search for meaning beyond the material world. He saw life as cyclical and symbolic, ideas he often encoded in his poems. The Nobel biography even mentions Keats' interest in in cyclical theories of life, the symbol of the winding stairs, as one of his themes. His spiritual pursuits and occult imagery were
After the World War I and Ireland's birth as a nation, Yeats entered a final creative phase. In 1917, he published The Wild Swans at Cool, which is often cited as the height of his poetic achievement. This period includes his great collections, The Tower, 1928, and The Winding Stair, 1933. In those books, Yeats reflects on aging, art, and Ireland's fate. For example, The Tower contains Sailing to Byzantia, an iconic poem in which an aging speaker longs to leave the mortal world for eternal art. Remarkably, Yeats was in his 50s and 60s during this late flowery. In 1923, he became the first Irish writer to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. His final volume showed enormous range. Last Poems and Two Plays, 1940, was published posthumously and includes witty, wise lines. He even chose his own epitaph. Cast a cold eye on life, on death, horsemen pass by. Yeats did not stop at poetry. In the late 1930s, he wrote The Herne's Egg, one of his few comedies, and he continued editing and writing essays. In 1936, he compiled the Oxford Book of Modern Verse, showcasing poets he admired. Yeats died in January 1939 in France, and World War II delayed the return of his body to Ireland. In 1948, he finally laid to rest in Drumcliff, Sligo, under the epitaph he penned.
Yeats' evolution was remarkable, from young romantic mystic to wise elder poet. He bridged 19th century symbolism and 20th century modernism, and he helped define Irish literature for generations. Today, Yeats is celebrated as one of the greatest English language poets of the 20th century. His fusion of personal mythology, historical insight, and pure lyricism set a new standard. There really was no precedent for a poet whose best work came in the last quarter of his life. His genius in old age reflected decades of spiritual growth and wisdom. Psychologically, Yeats' life shows how art can evolve with experience. The youthful dreamer became a more grounded observer, but even in his later poems, you can sense the visionary roots. His work reminds us that creativity can mature and deepen over time. William Butler Yeats' journey took him through myth and mystery, love and loss, war and peace. And in every phase, his voice remained authentic and powerful. His poems reminded us that art is a lifelong quest, a dialogue between memory, imagination, and the world around us. So, Ishita, case status
Still unresolved.
until the pages go silent again.